Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back in to bring you our 10.2 Season 3 Disc Priest Guide for Mythic Plus. In this video, we're going to be going over your stat priority, your talents, your spell priority, and what you should be looking for to be able to heal dungeons in Season 3 with ease. Disc, of course, if you haven't played it before, is a healer that's all about applying atonement to your allies, these nice friendly heal buffs, and then using damage to do the majority of your healing. You're going to be doing this by manipulating your Mindbender or your Shadow Fiend, which you're going to be talking about in the talents. You're going to also be multi-dotting enemies to be able to produce more atonement healing, and the vast majority of your output is going to come from large single target damage. AoE damage, things like Holy Nova or Halo, only convert into atonement off of one ally hit, so single target damage produces large AoE healing. When it comes to your talents, this is going to be, we'll have a link in the description down below as well for this talent build, but this setup is going to be tremendously powerful for Season 3, and it's going to be playing primarily off of your Shadow Covenant, which is now rolled into your Mindbender or your Shadow Fiends. When you activate that pet, it'll also activate Shadow Covenant at the same time, making all your shadow spells do more damage and do more healing as a result. Your Mindbender is going to be the only capstone that we're taking at the moment for this Season 3 build, and whenever you're activating it, you're also going to be able to do additional cleave damage through abilities like Inescapable Torment, where your Mind Blast, Shadow or Death, and Penance are also producing an AoE explosion. Like I mentioned before, most AoE abilities don't convert into atonement healing at a one-to-one basis, so only the first enemy hit by Inescapable Torment produces atonement output, but it's still very heavy. You also are getting really high uptime out of running Mindbender, because Mindbender and Shadow Fiend, if you run it, all get cooldown reduction and are able to be more present when you're using Smite, Mind Blast, and Penance, which then reduce the cooldown of your pet. With this, Mindbender is able to have really high uptime in and of itself to do large amounts of AoE damage, but it also produces really high uptime on Shadow Covenant as a whole, allowing you to have near 50% uptime onto your pet, which is also increasing a lot of your healing as a result. Ultimate Penitence is the new talent ability in Season 3, and where you are rising into the air and raining down a flurry of penance bolts. There's a number of different little niche issues with this spec at the moment. We'll go over them a little bit later, but this is a pretty powerful dungeon cooldown to be able to have on hand. But it's a little bit difficult to take all of the cooldown reduction, because abilities like Divine Aegis, Train of Thought, Harsh Discipline, and Lenience are also really powerful by extension. You're also going to be using Rapture and Barrier kind of freely as just defensive uses for your group. Barrier can be great for party or for tank external value. Rapture can be great for kind of like pre-shielding everybody to prevent any sort of danger from happening. On the class side of the tree, if you need the Disease Dispel, it's there for you to take. If you don't, you can always spec more into Throes of Pain for some more damage. Same thing goes for Mass Dispel, as not every dungeon is going to need it. And you always want to make sure you have Essence Devourer and Benevolence here, because both of them produce tremendous amounts of extra output over the course of a dungeon run. When it comes to your stats, you're primarily going to want to focus on Haste, Crit, then Verse, then Mastery. Both Crit and Verse are really strong. It's super easy to get Divine Aegis, and it's really powerful in dungeons and in raids. And so unless you really specifically need the versatility to survive crazy high level keys, you're going to want to go with more Haste and more Crit, as they're only going to benefit you in creating good absorb shields, but also in getting more casts out, which are going to give you more cooldown reduction for your pet, which is going to give you higher Shadow Covenant uptime, which is damage and healing and more. Your tier set bonus for Season 3 is as follows: the two-piece, where Smite and Penance damage has been increased by 20%, and Smite extends the duration of one active atonement by 2 seconds. Your 4 set is that Smite has a 100% chance to cast an additional time during Shadow Covenant, dealing shadow damage. Both of these together primarily are benefiting the Haste and Crit like we talked about. The 4 set, whenever you have your Squid up, your Mindbender, is producing an extra Smite hit that's also contributing to cooldown reduction, meaning having lots of Haste on hand means you're fitting in even more Smites during that Shadow Covenant duration, allowing you to get out more damage, more healing, more value for your team. The atonement extension that you're getting out of your two-piece is okay. It's not really that insane in dungeons. It can be kind of helpful if you don't want to have to refresh atonement onto your tank, but as we go over in the spell priority section, you'll usually be able to do that pretty easily as well. One of the biggest things to keep in mind when you are in dungeons is that you're primarily going to be healing the entire party together. Sometimes you're going to have those areas where you'll be able to drop a lot of healing into only the tank, but In most cases, when you're in dungeons, you're going to be maintaining atonement. This is going to be the number one thing when you're producing healing. You're going to maintain atonement on the tank at all times, either with powered shields or with any flash procs that you're getting from the Surge of Light talent. You're going to always be maintaining atonement onto the tank. When you need to actually produce group-wide healing, you want to make sure you're using it with powered radiance. You don't want to be individually single target atoning everybody all the time to deal with your problems. You can kind of do that preemptively with Rapture, but it takes a long time to do it, and there's a high likelihood with all the burst damage in these dungeons that somebody could be dead if you didn't use radiance and you were instead single targeting everybody to try to play a little more efficiently or whatnot. Radiance is going to be your primary atonement applicator in dungeons and also produces a lot of healing. Mindbender needs to be used as often as you possibly can. Sometimes I'll save it if I know that there's going to be a specific boss ability coming up, or if I know like a trash pack is going to deal a lot of damage. You can hold on to it, but otherwise you want to use it almost always on cooldown. Follow it up with a Mind Blast, which is now rolling in the Schism effect, so whichever target you hit Mind Blast onto, they'll also take 10% more damage, which produces more atonement healing. Penance is going to be one of your largest damage abilities, especially after your 2 set buffs, especially after all the buffs they've gotten in 10.2 themselves, and after you charge up its value to fire off more bolts with the Harsh Discipline talent. So keep in mind, you're going to fire off a lot of damage with Penance, and you want to make sure you're activating it at a point where it's going to receive the most healing. Shadow or Death is a very strong ability to use, whether it's in or out of execute range. It deals additional damage when the target is sub 20%, but when you're running the Inescapable Torment talent, like we mentioned before, it's also going to produce an additional Cleave, which also does atonement healing, meaning it's very worthwhile to use Shadow or Death even when you're not in execute range. It's also only a 10-second cooldown. Follow it up with Halo. Again, this is going to be during your Shadow Covenant, so your Halo is going to heal for more and is going to be doing more damage. Since there's a number of GCDs that you're kind of competing with each other, I prefer Halo over Divine Star because it's going to be safer, produce more healing, and make sure that you have more time to cast more smites, which you'll be doing afterwards, and using those smites, particularly with your new set bonus, to be double tapping smite damage into the target, dealing heavy damage, giving you cooldown reduction for your pet, and also allowing you to reset your penance with the Train of Thought talent, allowing you to follow up with another hard-hitting penance as needed. When you are not trying to produce as much healing as you possibly can, you always want to make sure you're using Purge the Wicked to spread around dots to a variety of targets, because that dot damage is also going to produce atonement healing. But as we just went over, when you need to produce a lot of healing on your group at once, you want to focus on that single target damage to produce the largest effect. One big thing to note in dungeons is you're not always having all your cooldowns back all the time, and you don't want to just sit on them anyway. Particularly abilities like Mind Blast and Penance, you don't always need to sit there and wait for all those abilities to be back off cooldown. And whenever you have the opportunity to use Shadow or Death, especially in Execute, you want to make sure that you're using it. You can use Shadow or Death anytime when you have your pet out, but when you see opportunities to produce the execute damage, you always want to make sure that you jump on it. Holy Nova is a very powerful ability that was actually nerfed going into 10.2 with the talent Rhapsody, where it's not producing as much damage as you did before. As a result, you're not really utilizing this a lot for the damage that it would then convert into healing. This ability is more for just large amounts of AoE damage just in general. As a result, I would primarily use this for when you're trying to AoE mobs down that aren't going to live that long, primarily things that are not worth dotting, like Saurids and Ataldazar. If you know that they're going to die very quickly, you can just Holy Nova them down to be able to deal with them. But if mobs are going to live a long time, you'd prefer to use things like Purge the Wicked, because the damage is going to be not only high, but also produce atonement healing to be able to help you in healing your allies. So keep that in mind. Usually what I do is use Holy Nova at max stacks and don't spam it unless I know that the trash packs are going to die quickly. Now, I mentioned Ultimate Penitence is going to be used. The way that you want to use this in dungeons is you want to hit Radiance on all your allies, hit Mindbender, and then hit your Ultimate Penitence to be able to produce a huge amount of healing. But there are some very, very important things to know about using this ability, and if you don't listen, you might be killed in-game. Number one thing is that your character is going to be flying and floating up in the air. They cannot be moved, you cannot be gripped, you cannot be rescued, you can't be interacted with. None of those things. You can't also be crowd controlled, so you can use it to immune fears. You're also going to gain a shield while you're upstairs, so you can be using this during large AoE damage. But there's some limitations. If your character's body is going to impact with the ceiling above, then Uppies will not activate. You'll basically just chain cast it and it won't go off. Void zones, fire patches on the ground. Some of them have what they call a Z-axis, where they'll actually hit you even though you are above them. So whenever you're in Everbloom this incoming season, there's fire patches that the third boss has, the mage boss. If you fly above them and try to use ultimate penitence while healing the fire damage, if a patch spawns at your feet, it'll actually deal damage to you and probably kill you through the shield that you have with the absorb. When you're dealing with targeted jumps, the Volkal boss in Ataldazar, it will target a player's location and jump on them, and you can see a swirl at your feet before he jumps. Well, if you're in the air, you're not going to see the swirl, and you're just going to get stomped on, and as a result, you could just be instantly killed from that point as well. Keep in mind, this ability can be interrupted, but only by you. You can interrupt your ultimate penitence channel by hitting escape, or attempting to cast other spells while you are channeling. It'll then drop you to the ground, remove your shield, and then you're going to be able to move around. So, with all these downsides, it's important to note that another talent option is available to you if you don't want to use Ultimate Penitence, and that would be the Blaze of Light talents, which increase your smite and penance damage. Not really any other gameplay interaction you have to worry about, but it's important to understand your options, because I don't think Ultimate Penitence is going to be the go-to pick for every single dungeon in Season 3. When it comes to using your cooldowns, I touched on this briefly before, but you have a few major ones with Rapture, Barrier, and Pain Suppression. What you want to be doing primarily when it comes to Rapture use is using this proactively before you are entering a trash pack, before the damage of a boss has actually gone out, so that you're able to take advantage of the extra shielding. It does take, a good amount of time. 5 or 6 seconds can be a long time in a dungeon when you're trying to heal up burst damage from a boss. So making sure you're as proactive as you possibly can to get shield value is always going to be decidedly important when dungeons are all about burst AoE damage these days. When it comes to high damage from, let's say, Priestess Alunza and Ataldazar, you'll be able to look at the energy bar and see when her next AoEs are going to be going out, allowing you to hit Rapture and shield the entire party so that you then have time to run out, grab your pool of blood, run back in, and then be able to do damage to produce atonement healing. A lot of times what I do with Rapture is I'll shield everybody, and then if I know that the atonement's been ticking for a few seconds, I'll refresh it with a powered radiance, and then I'll go into my single target damage rotation that we mentioned previously to be able to then produce all the healing needed to keep everybody alive. When it comes to Barrier, when people hold on to this ability way too much, having 20% damage reduction can be amazing for your tank when they're grabbing and lumping all of these mobs together. It's fantastic if you can get the entire party stacked in it to mitigate damage, but it's just a very strong ability that you want to make sure you're getting frequent use out of, because the more damage you're mitigating, the less you have to heal, and the more you're going to be able to sit tight, smite to your heart's content, and get your pet back for even more damage. Pain Sups as well. While it's often thought of as a tank external, and usually is, especially when tanks are very powerful and they're very self-sustaining, you can use this on yourself or other very squishy targets for incoming burst damage, primarily in areas where you know there's really heavy AoE damage and you may not have a defensive or a personal on hand. Dropping this onto yourself can mean that you can focus on other targets and in particular push additional output or a shield onto them while not having to worry about yourself and only letting atonement healing onto yourself do the heavy lifting. When it comes to trinkets in Season 3, a lot of the healer trinkets are decidedly poor, so it's important to keep this in mind. Also, damage trinkets do not convert into atonement healing, so if you wanted to run damage trinkets, keep in mind they're not doing any healing for you, but sometimes it's just better to have damage trinkets to kill trash packs faster, like we saw out of Beacon of the Beyond. The trinkets that you should be looking to target in Season 3 for Mythic Plus would be things like Pip's Emerald Friendship Badge, which drops from the Council of Dreams, Sea Star, which is, I think it's Verse and Intellect, which drops from Throne of the Tides, the Coagulated Venusaur Blood. This one got buffed in PTR. It was really poor, but I believe it's been buffed since, and that drops from the Everbloom. These are all stat sticks. And so what you would want out of this is to be able to have constant stats flowing for you whenever you're activating your Mindbender to activate Shadow Covenant to be able to pump out more damage. A lot of the trinkets, like I mentioned, are pretty poor in this incoming season, so running with a lot of trinkets that are just giving you stats is usually just preferred. Hope this guide helped you out to get ready for Season 3, and if it did, be sure to subscribe for more content, as we'll have a lot more on the way, and check out the Patreon if you'd like to support even further. Thanks so much for watching, guys. For any other updates, be sure to check out my guides on Wowhead for Disc and for Holy Priest, as they'll have updates for trinkets, stats, or any other changes that might come around the corner as Season 3 gets going. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.